MC this morning. Let me introduce you to the rest of the band. We have Ben Lancey as our liturgist. We have Sandy Bainbridge as our speaker. We have Lori on the keyboards, and we have Revier as our organist this morning. And we have Steve Bainbridge handing out and reading keyboard. So, take a deep breath. You're in for a ride. I'm sorry. And prepare yourself as Lori gets us ready to worship God.
Please stand and join me in the call to worship, followed by hymn 314. Give thanks to the Lord. Call upon God's name. Make the Lord's deeds known to all people.
Sing to God. Sing praises to the Lord. Dwell on all the Lord's wondrous works.
Give praise to God's holy name. Let the hearts rejoice of all those seeking the Lord.
Pursue the Lord's strength. Seek God's face always.
Remember the wondrous works the Lord has done, all God's marvelous works, and the justice the Lord declared.
You who are the offspring of Abraham, God's servant, and the children of Jacob, the Lord's chosen ones.
Please join me in the statement of faith in the Lord. In our remembrance, we know silence is not enough to change the world.
I have come that you may have life, and life to the full.
In our remembrance, we know silence is not enough to bring peace to the world.
Behold, I make all things new.
In our remembrance, we know silence is not enough to change the minds of leaders.
Your light must shine before people.
In our remembrance, we know silence is not enough to change the way we do things.
This is what I command you. Love one another.
In our remembrance, we know silence is not enough to convey the truth of war.
Every tree is known by the fruit it bears. The mouth speaks what the heart is full of.
In our remembrance, we know silence is not enough, but your words are.
Come and follow me.
Okay, one announcement before, two announcements. We have one announcement first before we start our prayers and requests. Jerry Beaber's service, even though it says in the bulletin 11, has been updated to 9:30 on that Saturday the 26th a.m. And then there will be following a luncheon or something afterwards. So update your calendars to 9:30. Rebecca will be sending out an announcement as well, but start getting it in your memory, because that's what I have to hear 3 times before you remember it. So, all right. Did you have an announcement or prayer request? Prayer? Announcement? Okay, Suzanne?
I probably should have done this at the beginning, but
Me too.
you have read a little bit about the hearing loop in the bulletin. It is now up and functioning, and we have 4 headsets, hearing loop receivers in the back. Ralph and I both used those last week. We were piloting them, and they were fabulous, because I forgot my hearing aid. Today I remembered my hearing aid, so Suzanne and Gary are trying out the hearing loop through T-coil that goes directly to your hearing aids. It's really, in my head, it's wonderful. Wonderful. So if any of you are having trouble hearing, Steve has 4 headsets in the back for you to try. You don't have to try them now if you don't want. Try them anytime, but they're great. And we'll get more advertising out in our social media presence on the internet, and I'm going to try to get a poster for the foyer so that we can advertise this wonderful feature. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions.
I'd say that's a praise.
So Gary has something.
A prayer and praise. And Gary.
It is a big time praise.
Probably don't need this, but I'd like to thank all of you for the funds you put forward to get the hearing aids. Just as a side note here, I couldn't have heard her at all without just, it would be all garbled. And I can't hear the minister. And now I can hear her. It's wonderful. Now I can do something about my eyes, I'm in good shape. Thank you very much.
Anyone else have a prayer they'd like to lift up? Belinda.
Oops.
Thank you. Pastor Charles successfully got to Cody, Wyoming yesterday, so that's great news. I was praying him all the way there. I thought, oh my gosh, he's in that crazy truck. He wouldn't take the car. He has to take his truck. All right, so he got there, he's settled, and his icon writing painting retreat starts today at 3. So thank you for supporting him on this renewal time. So that's a praise for safe travels. And we're celebrating 2 birthdays this week. Both are on Tuesday. Is it Rhea or Rhea? Rhea Esposito on Tuesday, and also Terry Himes. So we have those 2 birthdays this coming week. And we also have 2 anniversaries, one on Tuesday, Stephen Michelle Matthews, happy anniversary. And on Wednesday, Scott and Rebecca Clancy. So it's so exciting. Yes, so the flip side. And we had a wonderful church family breakfast yesterday at La Peeps. If you're ever interested, show up on the 2nd Saturday of the month. So praise God for getting together for that. And a great dinner circle at Merle Myers. And of course, the concern is all affected by the Hawaii fires. The fires in Hawaii that have just been absolutely devastating. And lastly, Fairview High School counselor Rupali Hoffman let me know that there's an immediate urgent need for liquid clothes detergent for their kind of old but still functioning washer and dryer near the counselor's office. And school starts, I got it wrong, school doesn't start in 2 weeks. School at Fairview starts next week. And already last week, a homeless student appeared at the counselor's office with father's clothes and personal clothes and said, I need to wash clothes. And they had no clothes detergent. So thanks to Angela Baker, we got it over there. So they got their clothes washed. But what a great thing to do to have a washer and dryer there for the students who need to wash their clothes. Something so basic. So it's a concern, and it's also a joy that this church family again has responded in love. We're going to collect this coming Sunday clothes washing, liquid detergent, and we'll deliver it the next day. But if you want to bring some, just the smaller bottles, because their cabinet cannot take large ones. And it's in the bulletin. So praise God.
They don't want the new pots.
They don't want the pods because it's an old washing machine. I asked her about that, and she said, well, it's pretty old, so I think maybe you just stick with liquid detergent is kind of what they've had success with, because liquid detergent can be measured just a little bit. If you just have a couple of pieces of clothing versus putting in a whole full dose for a whole washer load. So it kind of breaks me. It kind of breaks my heart and spirit to know that in our community there are homeless students who have such basic needs. And I'm so grateful we can do our part to meet some
Donate
of
some
them.
clothes to that young man or girl?
I can ask if they need clothes. She knows that we're responsive, and please pray for this continued partnership with Fairview High School. I'm really excited about it because they're looking at maybe even having some tutoring time in the fellowship hall after school. I don't understand it, but they lock the students out like at 3:30. They cannot be in the building. They can only come back at 5 to start athletics. So in the winter, in the rain, they just have to be outside. So I'm saying, hey, we're just down the hill. You can have the students come. They can have a safe, dry place if they need it. So prayers for our continuing partnership.
Thanks for that, Linda.
So there's clearly a very specific need at Fairview, and of course we will pray for those students, but school does start this week for the whole Boulder Valley school system, so please keep teachers, faculty, and students in your prayers. That affects mine, Moss, of course, who will be a junior this year. Last spring, Moss was diagnosed as autistic, level 1 autistic, so it's not severe. But we're looking for some support from the school this year for an IEP, individual educational plan. So I'm working with her counselor on that. So as we move forward with the support from Moss, please keep that specific prayer in mind. Thank you all.
What are the other prayers that we can lift up, or joys that we can lift up? I am asking Pastor Charles' question. Has God been doing anything in your life this week? Come on. You're healthy, you're here.
That's right.
You have the energy of 10 people.
How about you, Amy?
What's God? Well, I have been busy. And my husband is doing well.
Good.
And my sister is here from Alamosa, and I was chatting with her this morning. And we're taking my niece, who just turned 21, out for fancy cocktails this evening. And I was invited as the designated driver.
Oh.
I think that's the only reason I was invited.
Well, since we're talking about things that happened to us this week,
Yeah.
I had an exciting event Tuesday night. I was coming back from Fraser, where I had a boiler installed in my condo, had Jerry and my grandson with me. So we came back at 10 o'clock at night out here on 128, close to the Caslin, had an elk run in front of me. And I thought, it went by. Holy cow.
Oh my
I'm so happy that one went by well. They travel in bunches. So the next thing I knew, this other one came up over the shoulder and hit my car. Just ran into my car and bounced around. So now we're looking for a collision. But still, the car will drive. But it's out here in the parking lot looking very crippled.
I know other people.
But don't get hurt.
But you're good. You're more good.
Thank
Any
God.
others we can lift up?
Ooh, thank God.
Claudia?
Oh, I'm so glad you're safe.
I always had to scraping the bottom of the barrel. Prayer choice. My whole life I've wanted to watch the Perseid meteor showers that are this time of year. And this morning we got up at 4 a.m. and went out and looked, and there things were happening in the sky. I thought maybe it wouldn't really happen, but there were these just little streaks of light, and it was kind of like a miracle.
Yes.
That every year at this time there's this display in the sky for us and for anyone who's willing to get up and watch the day go on in that way. So thanks to God for making the world so beautiful.
Amen.
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 Yeah, no light pollution up at your house up there. That helps. Okay. If no one else has something they'd like to lift up, let's gather ourselves together in prayer. Heavenly Father, you are such a good, good God, and we are so grateful that we can be here together with you. And we lift up our joys and our concerns. We lift up the students at Fairview who need some extra help from us and from the community, that they will have a great start to their new year and have their needs fulfilled. We lift up all the students that are going back to school this week, that they will find their place, they will find their classrooms, they will find their teachers okay, and that the rest of us who have been driving with less traffic this summer will be aware that there are more people on the road and probably more bicycles. Father, we thank you for meteorite showers that just show more and more of your glory. And we lift up the people in Hawaii who have been devastated by this fire. And we ask that you will help them to gather together and to be strong together and find ways to look at the good, find the good in what's going on, and that you will help them be connected with FEMA and other disaster relief places that will help take care of them. We lift up those who were traveling to Maui for vacation and have been diverted, that they will be understanding, and they will also be grateful that they were not there when it was happening. And Father, we lift up all the devastating things that happen in our world, spoken and unspoken, things in our own lives that are unspoken, things that we are embarrassed to bring before you, things we think are too small. But we know, Lord, that you are a big God, and nothing is too big or too small for you. So we bring it all, Father God, and we lay it at your feet as we pray the prayer that Jesus taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Our first scripture lesson this week comes from Psalm 27, verses 13 and 14. I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Waking or sleeping, thy presence I
Second scripture reading this morning comes from Romans chapter 8, verses 18 through 25. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to decay, and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now, and not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience.
Good morning. I think I know most of you, but I'm Sandy Bainbridge. I'm here today, frankly, representing the Alzheimer's Association. I've been a volunteer with them for about 13 years now. My title is Community Educator. So I've been with a lot of people, and additionally, my husband's father and my mother had Alzheimer's disease, interestingly enough, diagnosed in the same month and died in the same year. So a lot of experience, a lot of stories to tell of this. But it's kind of a sad topic, so I thought I'd start with a story. This morning I was out walking with my walking partner, my neighbor, and I started sneezing and just carrying on. I thought, oh my goodness, this can't happen to me on a day where I'm doing a presentation. And I said to her, I think it's that weed over there, this brown weed with kind of a funny looking thing wrapped around it. So we stood there, and neither one of us could think of the name of this weed. And I said, pussy willow, and she says, no, it's not a pussy willow. Finally, I said, I think it's a cattail. So she goes on her computer, and she says to Siri, Siri, show me a picture of a cattail. What do you think Siri showed her? A picture of a kitty cattail. And then eventually we got down to the cattail. But if I sneeze this morning, please think of a cattail. So, Alzheimer's disease is a serious disease. The bad news is that 1 out of 3 over 65 will acquire this disease. So our attention to the research is really, really important, and that's what the Alzheimer's Association is spending all its money on, is research now. They have a lot of research scientists and speakers and whatnot. We also do a lot of consulting with families. We have caregivers, support groups, etc. I wanted to write, I actually wrote this sermon for a senior magazine right after my mother had passed away. There were so many thoughts in my head, so many things I had learned in 9 years. If you can believe it, at the time she was diagnosed, I didn't even know how to spell Alzheimer's disease. I mean, I really had just never paid any attention to it. And I remember my own grandparents, we said they were senile, was the word we used. So we've come a long ways in the understanding of the disease and the research. But I always like to start my presentation with talking about what is this disease? Actually, it comes from a family of diseases called dementia. And many people get confused about that word. When I tell them I'm an Alzheimer's presenter, they say, well, my family, Alzheimer's wasn't in the family, but they had dementia. But that would be like saying cancer. So that's the big word, dementia, and underneath it are all these various kinds of dementia. And in Latin, dementia means lack of brain or loss of brain. So anyway, I always like to start by correcting that, because so many people say to me, I don't want to hear an Alzheimer's lecture, I want to hear a dementia lecture. Interestingly enough, Alzheimer's makes up 67% of the dementias. But there are other dementias like Lewy body disease. That's the one Robin Williams passed away from, took his life. It's a really serious one. It's just probably the worst kind of dementia you could get. There's also vascular dementia, where you have blood clots from your heart that are going to the brain and disconnecting some of your functions. My mother had both, actually, both vascular dementia and Alzheimer's disease. And there's several others. Many diseases turn into Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease. If the person is lucky enough to live a long time, well, about half of them turn into Alzheimer's disease. So there's many memory diseases that we have to think about as we age. I know I certainly think about it, try not to, but as a family member with a parent who had the disease, I have a 15% increased chance. That used to really frighten me. I used to think about it a lot. But if you think about it, 15% isn't that much. And there's a lot of things we can do as we age to reduce that and make our chances better. Exercise being number one. If you've been reading at all about what you can do to elongate your life, exercise, which means walking, whatever your exercise is, plays a really key part. And there was some some piece of research I read a few months ago that if you walk 2 miles a day or some amount of miles, you can reduce it by 25%. And a friend wrote to me and he said, well, if I walk 12 miles a day, does that mean I'll never get it? And I said, it doesn't really work like that. So there's not tons we can do about the disease, but we can mitigate how we travel through the disease. For our family members, it was 9 years. That's a long time. They both lived into their 90s, but that was about 10% of their life with Alzheimer's disease. So that's a scary number. My sermon today is about what we learned and where God fit into that. So I don't want to be too sad, so I'm going to sprinkle it with a lot of really funny stories about my mom. So the disease travels in strange ways. It starts over here, where the memory is. And I'm not a doctor, so I can't tell you all the terms, but it starts over here on this side of the brain. And my mom, it moved pretty slow. For 4 years, she lived at the Meridian. She was a member of the church. She Pastor Scott would visit the Meridian, and he was so kind to her. I can't tell you how wonderful he was to all of us in that time of our life. But the disease moved pretty slow. What I learned, my lesson in that, is that is the most difficult period for the person with the disease, because they know they're losing their memory. And they're still functional, they're still doing lots of things, but my mother used to cry and say, I don't understand what's happening to me. And she'd say, I reach for the doorknob and it's not there, and funny things. I mean, she was very functional, but she was ill. And I think for me, and especially for her, that was a really, really difficult time. 4 years. Now, the good news about that is we had 4 really good years with her. She was very funny. A lot of people with Alzheimer's disease lose this part of the brain where our filters are. This is when we want to yell and scream and swear and whatnot. Sometimes the disease travels there. And we all know people who you say, ooh, where did that come from? I know in the residence, my mother was in 3 different residences, and I've never heard so many bad words in my whole life. People walking around yelling all kinds of things. It's like, whoa, you know. But this is when the disease impacts this part of the brain, which is all your filters are. I remember one of my students in one of my classes talking about her dad who had hearing aids, and he was always fiddling with them, and they were never quite right. And she took him out for his birthday, and the first thing he did was pick up his steak, eat it like this in front of this fancy restaurant. She was so appalled. She said, I had to say to myself, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Then she's driving him back down to Denver from this beautiful restaurant, and he said, I'm so sick and tired of these hearing aids, and he rolls down the window and throws them out. And I don't know about what you paid for your hearing aids, but my mom's were $6,000. and she flushed them down the toilet one day. So, there's lots of things, hearing aids being one of those things that the manager of the residence she was in said we're always sucking them out of the toilet, trying to get them back. But they're kind of a bother. Now we have new technology now and whatnot, but for those that who are aging, whether they have Alzheimer's or not, those hearing aids are a bummer. So I'm glad we're doing what we're doing with the functions here. My mother was very, it was funny because she was a bride. She was married to my dad for 62 years, and she was a kind of a 50s bride. And my dad was always the leader. He always had the last word and whatnot. And he passed away at 79. So, and she became this woman that we didn't know. She had opinions. She read the newspaper. She would spar with Steve about Republican issues, Democratic issues. And as she got Alzheimer's disease, she seemed to read a lot, which is another good thing to do. We need to be using our brain so we don't lose our brain. But she was very funny. And so she was at the Meridian. She lived there for 4 years, and she loved her beer. My dad owned a Budweiser distributorship in his late years of his career, so we had a lot of beer around our house. And she loved the Bud Light. And so every Friday night we would go to Meridian and see her, and they would have a happy hour. We'd sit with her, and we'd say, "What'd you do this week? What'd you do, Mom?" And Steve was her favorite son-in-law, her only son-in-law, but he was her favorite, and they would drink their beers together. So Steve said, "What did you do this week, Beverly?" And she says, "We went in the mountains. We had this wonderful guide. They take him in busloads to different places, and he showed us all the rocks, and he told us all about him. He was this absolutely great gynecologist." And Steve says, "You mean geologist?" And she says, "No, gynecologist." And this goes on for a couple of minutes. I look at Steve and I said, "It really doesn't matter." But here's the brain, confusing. And she wasn't about to change her mind on that. So we love that story. We take that story. The other funny story, I mean, she just had this sense of humor. And I guess that's one way of dealing with the disease at the same time, especially during those early years when you realize that you're sick and you're terminal, but you may live for a long time, which is always a frightening topic, I think, thinking of living for a long time with the disease. Anyway, she had a cat. The cat's name was Beaber, and initially when my dad passed away, the cat wanted nothing to do with my mom. She would sit on the toilet and he'd come over, "What's her what?" And he was really not happy that my dad wasn't around. But sooner or later, this was before she was diagnosed, I went to visit her in Seattle, and she had a plate set for the cat at the table. And I said, "Mom, I don't think that's very sanitary." She says, "Well, at least he's not swapping my butt anymore." She was really very funny. She had great stories. So she had this cat, Beaber. This is the same cat, and he was 17, and he started showing signs of being very ill. And I told her we need to go see the vet. I'm pretty sure they're going to suggest we put the cat down. This cat had traveled in an airplane from Seattle to the Meridian. We didn't think he'd make that trip, but he got out of the cage and he's running through the airport. My daughter says, "He's here, he's making a big scene." Anyway, this cat, we had a lot of memories of this cat, Beaber. Anyway, so we put him in a cart, we roll him across the street when there used to be a vet behind the gas station down there, and the lady takes the cat and examines him and whatnot. She comes, and I'm wearing big glasses. I mean, this cat was part of the family for 17 years, and I knew I was going to cry. And I think my mom might have had glasses on, I can't remember, but the vet comes out and she says to my mom, "Now, Beverly, we do need to put the cat down. He has cancer and a lot of other things, but there's something I can do for you that a lot of people like. I can cut a little piece of his hair and put it in an envelope for you." And this is the stage where my mom started to really lose it. And she pipes up and she says, "That's very nice, but I could get that out of the vacuum cleaner." She was just hysterical. I mean, you never knew. From one minute to the next, she might be crying, and the next minute she might be telling a funny story. And they were never dirty stories or anything. They were just very funny stories. But what I learned again, I knew nothing about Alzheimer's disease, and I was working in Europe, and my brother called me where she was living near him and said, you know, we have to make some decisions. And so I started doing some research. As luck would have it, our company was winding down and preparing to sell, and this was in 2009, and there was a recession, so they sent us all home, which was great, because Steve and I could then spend a little more time with our parents. But the challenge that I think was probably the biggest challenge for us was learning about residential care. At the time, we were living in Frisco at 10,000 feet. My mom also had COPD, and so she couldn't live at 10,000 feet. She would come visit, and we had to have an oxygen tank, and it was hard for her to walk down the streets of Frisco or Breckenridge. And so I began to look for a place for her. And the Meridian, she had been at the Meridian before we moved to Frisco, and so that was good. But one time, at Christmas time, she wasn't feeling well, and she wanted to go home, and I said, it's Christmas Eve, let's wait till Christmas Day, and I'll take you home. She got up in the middle of the night, she found her medicine, and we had 2 weeks of medicine in those little 7-day things, and she took it all. She thought, I don't feel good, so I'll just take all this medicine. And I had hidden one, what I didn't realize, my daughter who lives in Boulder had loaded them up for all the weeks. And so I didn't take those. I took the one that I thought was the medicine, and I left the others. And so she overdosed on her meds. We found her outside at 3 o'clock in the morning, in her pajamas, trying to start a car. And this wandering is a sign of Alzheimer's disease when it is moving along. It's moving through our brains. And we don't know where we are. We don't know what's happening. It was one of the saddest things. Fortunately, we were all there as a family. And she did get in one of the cars, and the alarm went off. And somebody in the household. But I knew at that time it was time to move her from the Meridian. Now, the Meridian was wonderful, and I know we have at least 2 people who are living there. I can't say enough about the Meridian, and when it's our time, Steve and I intend to move there. It had a great social life. My mom was very social. It allowed animals. At that time, we were doing a ministry there. It had happy hours, Sunday dinners. I mean, it was a wonderful place and with a view of the mountains. But it did not have long-term care things. You can hire things there. For a while I did that, but I realized I needed more care for my mom. So they have what you've probably seen these and heard about them, continuum of care. Residents that go from independent living to some skilled nursing that go to memory care, or actually kind of hospital care for people who have falls and whatnot. I didn't know it, but at the time, those kinds of facilities are typically more expensive because you're securing places for the future. One of the things that I personally felt when I visited those places that I couldn't get it out of my head is my mom sitting fairly functional with a person who was babbling bad words. I just couldn't see the social thing there. And so I kept her at the Meridian as long as I could, where it was a more normal senior setting. Eventually I did have to put her in a memory care. I chose Balfour down on McAllister. Is that the right word, McAllister? And that worked pretty well. She was happy there. But what I learned about that place is they had a good nursing staff, they had a good manager. One of the problems with these residential cares is they turn over people quite quickly. Now the Meridian has had Marcia there for a long time, since 2009, which is really good. The Balfour changed managers, and I was really good friends with the manager who was also an Alzheimer's presenter, and we had a new younger person with not as much experience come. And that's where I learned all the bad words. It was at the Balfour, because for many of those folks, the disease had moved into the filter space of their brain. And my mom didn't seem to notice it. But a couple things happened there. First of all, theft. A lot of theft. And it's not intentional theft. I remember my mother one day, she lost her glasses. And so she has this pair of glasses on, and I look up and somebody else's name on them. She said, well, they look just like mine. I don't know where she picked them up, but she had somebody else's glasses on. It wasn't unusual to see people wearing her clothes. And then the laundry, they wouldn't get sorted, although they had the names on them. And that was kind of frustrating to me, and I would have to go around and gather them back. So even when you put your loved one in a facility and you pay a lot of money, you still have a huge job. I lived in Frisco. I would come down about 3 times a week. Just to make sure she was safe. I also had 2 grandchildren here, so that was another positive thing, to see the grandchildren and volunteer in their schools. But she was paranoid that someone was stealing from her, and so she would hide things. My 5-year-old grandson knew all her hiding places. But what I learned, which is part of my lessons, is that you have to be on a watch out. Don't take expensive things there. Take the jewelry away or sentimental things, because they may disappear. And I don't mean that there are thieves walking through the Alzheimer's units, but people forget what is theirs, what isn't theirs. And my mother was as guilty as anyone else. And so I learned to went through her closet and sorted her clothes, and I would find other clothes in there, although they were supposed to, sort the clothes. Things happened. The turnover in the laundry was immense. What I learned is they don't pay very well in these communities. We learned that during COVID. They had to wear masks, and there was a huge turnover during those residential facilities during COVID with all different kinds of things. The last place my mother was in, they paid $9 an hour. And this was in about 2015. It wasn't that long ago. I mean, who could work and live on $9 an hour? So one of the things I say to people, be sure you really investigate. Don't just listen to the speech you get from the consultant. They get paid by placing the resident. And so they are not totally biased, although I work with one now called I didn't say it, I wrote it down. Oasis. I don't know, let me double check my notes. Oasis, like the oasis where you go to get water, Oasis. And they are the most honest people, and they live in the community here, and they have started up a business based on their experience with his mom of helping people find the right residence. They don't charge you for the help, like they get paid. But I feel like they're so honest that they know everything in the state of Colorado, so I don't feel like they have to push a particular residence. But I didn't have those kind of luxuries when my mom, 15 years ago, at least I didn't know about those kinds of services. I didn't even know about the Alzheimer's Association. I think somebody at the Meridian told me about that. So, as a caregiver, there's lots of work for you to do. Lots and lots of work. And Steve and his father was in Santa Fe, so a bit of ways away. His mother was still living, so he had some support at home. And they chose not to go into a residence, but they had 24/7 care. $120,000 a year. A lot of money. My mother had her own money. We didn't have to chip in, but it would have never lasted at $120,000 a year. None of their children lived close by, so for them that was the right choice. I was thrilled to be able to be with my mom, and especially those first 4 years. We did a lot of things together. She was so funny. One day she liked to go with me places. She didn't know where she was or what we were doing, but she liked to ride in the car. One day I was going to the hairdresser, and she said, "And why are you going to the hairdresser?" And I said, "Well, you see this gray here? I'm going to get that covered up." And she said, "I never had gray hair." And I pulled the mirror down. My mother was totally gray. She says, "I would call that silver." I mean, I couldn't believe, she couldn't remember my name, but she could, and she didn't know it was a joke. She said it as a statement, and I looked at her and I said, "Okay, whatever." But she, so I want to close out on the residential care. You really have to do your homework, and even years in advance. I mean, there's lots of time people with early Alzheimer's can live alone for a long time or with some caregiving help and whatnot. But you do have to really pay attention to the progression over time. For me, the turning event to move my mom was when we found her outside at 3 a.m. You know, we're very lucky that she didn't wander away. She wanted to get in a car and drive home. You have to understand their stage of decline. And I didn't understand the disease very well, even though I started taking Alzheimer's classes, but I didn't understand the progression very well. So there are 3 stages, now 4 stages of Alzheimer's disease. The first stage is called mild cognitive impairment. It's called MCI. We're reading a lot about this early stage because this is where that new drug, Aducom, I think it's called, I've been reading about. This is the stage where that drug is being introduced. And I don't know a lot about that drug. I have a 2-hour meeting tomorrow to learn about it. But it has been in trials for about 2 years. And just in the last few months, the FDA has approved it and Medicare has picked it up, which means our insurance companies will pick it up next. Before that happened, it was like $56,000 a year. I mean, only the very, very rich could afford to pay that. But it's a drug that treats that early stage. So it doesn't cure the disease, it doesn't make it go away, it just makes you a little more functional at the beginning. I have mixed emotions about that. I mean, the jury's out for me about the drug. First of all, if you read about it, it has a lot of side effects. So you have to consider those and your other health issues. The second thing that really concerns me, do you really want to live longer with Alzheimer's disease? One of the things, my mom and I had such a good time that I would have done anything to extend her life. Did I realize what that meant? Not at all. I remember she had a lot of pain in her shoulders. So she was diagnosed at about 84. And at about 87 or 88, she had all this pain in her shoulders and she could hardly walk. So I took her to this wonderful doctor in Boulder, who is fortunately very hard to get into. Her name is Dr. Doogie, and she specializes in elderly care. And she's probably in her 50s, but she's really, really good. She would hug my mom and call her sweetheart, make her feel comfortable before she would have her undress or whatever. Anyway, we went to Dr. Doogie, and Dr. Doogie said it's her heart. Let's do some examination. Well, she had some blocked valves in her heart, so she needed some surgery. And I didn't even think twice. Yes, we're doing this. And she came out of it okay. She was still pretty functional. About 3 years later, the same thing. And same doctor. I remember the nurse, we're at the hospital, we've seen the doctor's PA, a physician assistant, everything's all set up, and the nurse comes out and she says, tell me again why you're here. And I told her, she says, okay. And I could tell she'd been sent by the doctor, but this is all set up. After the surgery, the doctor calls me into his office and he says, I have no idea why you're doing this, why you did this surgery for your mom. She has Alzheimer's disease. She's dying. Wouldn't it have been better for you to just let life take its course? I have to tell you, I was so insulted, I was crying. I mean, I'm not going to play God. And that wasn't my role. And he told me after he did the surgery, after he said, he hadn't sent me the bill, but he did it after. I thought, of all the gall, to talk to me like that afterwards. Now I think back, I think I probably would have made the same decision. It was my mom. I wasn't ready for her to go. But she lived 9 years with the disease, and those last couple of years were brutal. We as caregivers have to really prepare ourselves, center ourselves around what our role is in taking care of her. She didn't know who I was. I moved her to a third place. Let me finish that story. So I walk into her residence at the Balfour. It's about 10:30 in the morning. At this point in time, she's getting quite a bit of care. They dress her in the morning. She's incontinent. So they toilet her. They help her get ready for the day. And here she is at 10:30 in the morning with bright red hair. I mean, brilliant, kind of a purple red. And I think, what is that? So I go up to the concierge and I said, what's with my mom's hair? And she says, I don't know. I saw her come in, but I didn't really look at her. Well, here my mom is. So I go to the manager's office and I say, what's the deal with my mom's hair? And she says, oh, we thought maybe you might have dyed it, which I knew was a lie. I said, well, you know me well enough to know I wouldn't do that with my mom. And so then the nurse comes up and I said, did you toileted my mom? You dressed her? Did you notice her hair? No. Well, she had taken her lipstick and decided to put it in her hair. So I was furious that she'd been there till 10:30. They get them up about 7:30 and no one had noticed. I mean, I can't tell you. I mean, I really had to talk about controlling my filters. So I decided, you know what, she needs more supervision. It wasn't that she could walk, she was still pretty functional, she could eat, but she needed more supervision. So I found a home with only about 4 people. They were all about the same stage. Big mistake in retrospect. But I interviewed the owners, I interviewed the manager, I talked to previous people who had lived there. A friend of mine had his wife, this man owned about 6 residents. This is big business, folks. For a lot of people buy these old homes, they divide them out, they hire some cheap labor, and they call it a memory care. There's not a lot of state influence over memory cares. Out of my frustration with these facilities, I joined a state group. It was a focus group for residential cares run by the state. And I was the only consumer in the room. Everyone else on that board owned a residence or was a manager of a residence. And I couldn't believe it. I told them, you need consumers here. These people all have an agenda. And they told me, they said, well, Sandy, we just don't have any money. You know, we're lucky if we can get around to visit these places every 5 years. I said, you gotta be kidding me. She said, we just don't have any money. We have ombudsmen, which are provided most by the towns. Like in Boulder, we have ombudsman, that's a hard word for me, that if you complain to them, they will take the case and go on. But there are only so many of them. And I was very frustrated. And I lived in Frisco. I was driving 2 hours to get to these meetings. I thought, you know, I can't sit here. This isn't for me. But that shows you. Now, I would hope, since 1915, we've improved that. But you gotta ask a lot of questions. Do they have ombudsman in that facility? Do they have oversight? Who owns the place? How many places does he own? Where's the money going? These people in this home had to do everything. They had to do the cooking, cleaning, they had to mow the yard. And I was just oblivious to this. I just wanted them to take care of my mom. Bad mistake. You know, I learned a lesson there. But I talked to her doctor and he said it's too late in life to move her. It'll kill her, so let's just leave her where she is. She did go into hospice. It was funny, another funny story. So there's a minister, a chaplain who comes around. He's this good-looking guy, he's about 35. And my mom, for whatever reason, got fascinated by men. If a man would enter the residence, she'd cozy up to him and say, are you married? This is where her filters. She didn't have bad words, but she was looking for a man, which I have no idea why. But anyway, I said to this young man, I said, oh, my mom's going to have fun with you. And he said, I already met her. I wasn't exactly sure what that meant. But I remember one of the stories in the kitchen. My mother was an early riser, and she'd get up early and she'd go join the caregivers in the kitchen. And you know, they begin to see things. I mean, the brain is a funny thing. By the way, if you know one Alzheimer's patient, you only know one because everyone is different. So I'm telling my mom's story. But anyway, my mom, she would sit down and have a cup of coffee and she'd say to them, you see that guy standing over there? And they'd all say, what guy, Beverly? Well, that one right over there, that good-looking one. Don't touch him, he's mine. And of course, it was total imagination. But they got a big kick out of it, and it gave her something to talk about. But it's funny, the things. And there was a young gentleman, he was only 18, that they hired to sit with the ladies. It was all ladies. And they would watch Gunsmoke over and over and over. And I'd come there, and finally I got so I would take poems. You know, the brain is an interesting thing, and with the disease, you can remember things from the past, but not in the present. So I would take little poems about Mary Had a Little Lamb. I would take my grandchildren's book and read. They all knew the words. They all could sing with me. It was really wonderful, and it was better than Gunsmoke, because they would sit them in front of the TV. And so this young man says to me, he says, you know, your mom touches me. And I said, okay. So she has Alzheimer's disease, she has macular dementia, and she has no idea what's going on. Well, she touches me in inappropriate places. And I said, you gotta be kidding me. Well, what I found out is, interestingly, as she got sicker, she wanted the touch more. She was never a touchy-feely lady. Growing up, my hugs were few and far between. I know she loved me, but I mean, these days you hug everybody. And it just wasn't what she was doing. Well, she wanted this man to just put his hand on her knee or to put his arm, and he was sure that she was sexually attacking him. I said, oh, you just gotta be kidding me. I said, let's have a little Alzheimer's lessons here about this. And here's what you do. You take her hand, you put it back and say, I love you dearly, let me give you a hug. And anyway, so, I mean, now again, do you think that a caregiver would have told me that? I had to find that out myself from this young man. So, interesting things. I don't know where long in time. Anyway, there's so many things. You have to watch the progression over time. Somebody told me at one time my mother was a teenager. She made some bad decisions, but she was pretty functional. She could eat, she could talk, she could move along. Then she, what I learned is I had to go with it. I had to roll with it. The 3 times I would come and visit her a week, I never knew exactly where she was going to be. Over time, she became a 2-year-old. She was incontinent. We had to put diapers on her. She didn't know who I was. I had to tuck her into bed, read her songs, etc. So you just have to prepare yourself for how life is going to go, for all the changes that are going to come about. So where did God fit in all this? Living in Frisco, I had at least an hour and a half ride home every time. And I would kind of cry myself on the way home and say, what can I do? First, I prayed for her in the early stages, because she knew she was ill, she knew she was dying, and I prayed that God would help her through that. Then I started praying for myself. When she kind of went into what I call la-la land, she didn't know what was happening, she didn't know what was going on, but I was overwhelmed watching her. And so then I prayed to God to help me just get through it. And I realized I really needed something else to do. And I love kids. And so I decided to become a substitute at the daycare center in Frisco. And I have to say, it was God sent. It just raised my spirit so much. Because as my mom's going backwards, all these little kids are going forwards. It made such a difference to me. Grieving while she was alive, I was with these little kids, and grieving afterwards. And here today, some 12 years after her death, I'm still taking care of babies. And I can't tell you what a heartbeat it does for me. And I was a director of a whole sales force in Europe. My husband always says, I can't get it. Why you went from that big job to babies? I said, I get it. I understand. But it's really important as you caregive to keep young people in your life, to watch them growing up, to watch the Bens go through college, to watch all these people. God keeps us going. Reproduce isn't really the right word, but it comes to me as one that we have to take joy in what we get back. Thank you for being here. I'm always available as a consultant. If you have groups that would like to hear something, we have like 30 different classes we do. I'm happy to help. It's kind of my passion, and it helps me through the whole grieving process. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sandy, for sharing your heart, and we all know someone who's going through some stage of this. If you would please stand and sing, Here I Am. went to my sister's church one time, and they did it as a rock and roll song, and I loved it like that too. So, where is God calling you? And are you saying, is it I, Lord? Are you listening? So I ask you to go this week out into the world and listen. Is it I, Lord? Is this one for me? Or is it not for me? Because sometimes it's not. But be open to be, what did my sister say? Be big enough to take on the challenge. Be small enough to ask for help. So I leave you with those words. Here I am, Lord.